Welcome everyone as we kick off our celebration week for the Academy's 80th birthday. I'd like to welcome to the stage Please welcome the 14th Superintendent of the United States Merchant Marine Academy, Vice Admiral Nunan.
Michael, did you think I needed a stool? Because I seem to be taller now, so thank you for that. So thank you all for being here. We have a lot to celebrate, so I wanted to give a sort of a little overview of what this 80th anniversary of our dedication means. A couple things I'll just kick off with before I get started. We've had a couple of really big wins recently against SUNY Maritime. The football team. The rugby team. And I also want to point out our cross-country teams have also been amazing. The men won their cross-country races this weekend, and also Catherine Kirchner beat everybody. So, good afternoon and happy 80th anniversary to all of you and to our entire Kings Point community. 80 years ago, on September 30th, 1943, in front of 2,500 guests packed into the O'Hara Gymnasium and a national audience of millions listening to their radios, a message from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was read. This academy serves the Merchant Marine as West Point serves the Army and Annapolis serves the Navy, and thus Kings Point was dedicated. The day continued with a parade of midshipmen before a crowd of nearly 9,000. 76 busloads of visitors have been brought up from the Great Neck train station, and 1,200 cars were parked on the Academy campus. The day included a medal ceremony for a cadet midshipman who saved a fireman's life as their ship was torpedoed, and a celebration at the waterfront, just like your end of in-dock field day, complete with monomoy races. 2 years later, on September 29th, 1945, Kings Point took one of their first steps towards post-war life. The football team played their first game, taking on Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute at home on Kendricks Field, now called Toome Field. The score was 29-16 Kings Point, so happy anniversary to the football team. Today we gather to celebrate our heritage and renew our dedication to task and purpose. Heritage is equal parts history and identity. We must study who we once were in order to understand who we are now and who we should one day become. I have also said that one of the pillars of American greatness, of victory in the Second World War, rests on the campus of the United States Merchant Marine Academy. Today, we must examine some of the stones in that foundation. This piece of land has always echoed with the footsteps of legends. Native Americans called it menhaden, which was their word for bunker, the fish that teems in these waters and attracts the big bluefish and striped bass some of you have reeled in down at the waterfront. This bit of land was named Kings Point in honor of its one-time owner, John Alsop King, a governor of New York. His father was Rufus King, a founding father who fought in the Revolution, was a buddy of Alexander Hamilton, ratified the United States Constitution, and was appointed by Thomas Jefferson to be the ambassador to Great Britain. The Kings were a powerful New York political family connected by marriage to another powerful New York family, the Rensselaers. Once upon a time, a steamboat carried passengers back and forth to New York City from the bottom of Steamboat Road. But really, it was the railroad that made the farming village of Kings Point accessible to city dwellers and real estate developers. This immediate area was called the Grenwold Development, whose glamorous houses, including mine, Quarters A, and the houses just outside the fence along the road between the gym and Patton Hall, were meant to call to mind the hedgerows and byways of the English countryside. The Chrysler Estate, now Wiley Hall, according to one writer, evoked diaphanous summer evenings on sweeping lawns, mad parties, and impossibly big waterfront mansions, as over it all, the smell and feel of fresh money, crackling and new, pervaded the whole atmosphere. Kings Point had become part of Long Island's Gold Coast, a playground of America's elite. A century ago, even as movies were being filmed in studios and lots in California, the corporate headquarters for the motion picture industry was still in New York. Studio executives, actors, and directors summered on Long Island, and one of the focal points for their high-rolling social life was right here on what became our campus. Land Hall, the home of the Midshipmen Pub and Cookie Cafe, belonged to Thomas Schenck, the president of Lowe's Theaters Incorporated. His private swimming pool down at the bottom of those stone steps is now our Prosser Boathouse, the rowing center. His house and the house of Thomas Meighan, a silent film star, which is now Melville Hall, were frequent popular destinations for stars like Douglas Fairbanks, Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, Greer Garson, Lana Turner, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, Charlie Chaplin, Humphrey Bogart, and Irving Berlin. Ring Lardner, the first great writer of the jazz age who became a major influence on up-and-coming talents like John O'Hara and Ernest Hemingway, told a young F. Scott Fitzgerald that he would not believe the parties that went on here. Ed Wynn, who played Uncle Albert in the original Mary Poppins, had bought the Schenck House or Land Hall. After a party started with fireworks shot out over the water, everyone's kids and their nannies were sent home, and the party raged all night and into the next day. Showgirls danced, and everywhere you looked was glamorous, dazzling actresses. The party continued through the day, but moved to the Meighan house next door, which is Melville Hall, and kept rolling all the next night. Needless to say, Fitzgerald was impressed, and a true-to-life epic event that happened here on our campus went on to inspire similar moments in one of the greatest works of American literature, The Great Gatsby. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. Fortunes were lost, and the light and laughter faded from the mansions on the Gold Coast. The Great Depression had begun. America grappled with modernizing, stabilizing, and strengthening its economy. In other countries, dark forces took advantage of the moment to push nationalistic agendas that mushroomed into conquest and genocide. Our allies were attacked, and soon America was too. By the end of 1941, Nazi Germany controlled much of Europe. The U-boats terrorized the Atlantic. Japan had taken Thailand and Guam and was advancing on Singapore and in the Philippines. The fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor cruised with impunity through the Pacific. America was neck deep in a war we were losing fast. However, nations that patiently and honestly become modern, stable, and strong can also mobilize in a time of emergency. Factories were retooled, recruiting stations filled with prospective soldiers and sailors. Maritime academies had been in the works as part of America's modernization in the 1930s. The state schools were established before the federal program was set up, and New York's Fort Schuyler, which we now know as SUNY Maritime, was temporarily housing federal cadets. I have to stop for a moment to acknowledge SUNY Maritime for extending their best wishes just last week. As their new training ship Empire State 7 arrived during their celebration the other day, they were kind enough to fly a KP Burgee in honor of our 80th anniversary. was a tremendous gesture which we will not soon forget. On January 24th, 1942, the federal cadets were ready to move into their new home. It was bitter cold. The temperature stuck in the teens, the wind shrieking across the water the way it does in winter. They pushed off from Fort Schuyler, rowing monomoys across the expanse like Washington crossing the Delaware, while on the bluffs of the Gold Coast, the darkened mansions watched in silence. Having landed at the pier at the bottom of Steamboat Road, these teenagers threw their sea bags over their shoulders and hiked up the hill to the Chrysler estate. Mattresses had been chucked in every corner of the upstairs rooms, and for a number of months, the entire academy, the cadet quarters, mess hall, and classrooms were all in the Chrysler mansion. Those arriving cadets were split into work details. They either went to nearby greenhouses on the estate to build wooden bunk beds, or they went to the kitchen to cook meals. The increasing numbers of federal maritime cadets meant that the original 12-acre Chrysler property would not be big enough to home the academy. The government bought the adjoining properties, one big house between the Chrysler House and Land Hall, where the Palmer Barracks is now, did not last, nor did a house that stood where the gym is now. They bought Land Hall, Melville, Quarters A. They crossed Steamboat Road and bought the properties that are now the playing fields and practice fields. In January 1942, before the cadets landed at the foot of Steamboat, an architecture firm had surveyed the landscape and designed our present rectangle of buildings in a matter of days. Cadets poured into campus, and to accommodate them, 12 forest green wooden buildings from the New Deal's Civilian Conservation Corps were trucked in and set up where Barney Square is now. They were named for famous sailing ships, Hornet and Intrepid among them. 6 buildings were barracks, 3 were classrooms, and the other 3 were a drill hall, mess hall, and staff barracks. Around them, ringing the campus, our new buildings were going up. Through the spring of 1942, as German U-boats continued to inflict heavy losses on U.S. shipping, President Roosevelt signed a number of executive orders concerning maritime policy. Among them was the transfer of all federal maritime training to the Coast Guard. Arguably, this was to allow the Maritime Commission, who ran the academy, to focus on shipping. Still, the order came very suddenly and very secretly, which made people suspicious of the Coast Guard's motives. Their worst fears were realized in April 1942, when the Coast Guard Commandant, Admiral Waesche, was touring the Kings Point campus. He ordered a halt to all construction. This place is a temporary wartime arrangement, he declared. It does not merit permanent construction. The Maritime Commission went straight to the top. The executive order is not having its intended effect, they told the president. Roosevelt reached across the desk, picked up the phone, and called Admiral Waesche, saying clearly and loudly, and I quote, "Get the hell out of Kings Point and stay out." Before there was Beat Coast Guard, there was get the hell out of Kings Point. So at the front gate, the sign used to say, United States Coast Guard Merchant Marine Academy. After that phone call, the sign came down, a new one went up saying for the first time, United States Merchant Marine Academy. By the time the September 30th, 1943's dedication day arrived, the new buildings had opened their doors. Furuseth, Bowditch, Fulton, Samuels, the barracks named for Murphy, Cleveland, Jones, Barry, and Rogers. These were all famous figures from maritime history. O'Hara Hall was named for Cadet Edwin O'Hara, who was already a legend for single-handedly pumping 5 4-inch shells into a German raider before being killed in a street fight of a sea battle. Delano Hall is ostensibly named for Amasa Delano, a shipbuilder and author, but it is also a subtle nod to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in appreciation for that phone call. When those first cadets landed at the foot of Steamboat Road on that cold winter's day, they were met by a handful of faculty members. There were shouts, salutes, and some handshakes, but there was no ceremony. They hiked up the hill and went straight to work. In a matter of minutes, in a time of war, the character of this academy was permanently forged. Quote, pragmatic, focused, and goal-oriented. Some of the first lessons were taught deep in the basement of the White Mansion around the enormous cast iron boiler and its pressure gauges, tricocks, water gauge glasses, siphons, and stop and safety valves. This monster, as they described it, saved the lives of many men at sea. Other than that, very little was provided for those young students. Yet, they were having the time of their lives, building an academy from the ground up. They had no machine shop at first, but just a bucket of tools that went everywhere. They improvised and sacrificed, and these kids became, to quote once more from In Peace and War, that book we all know, inventive, tough, resilient, practical-minded, self-confident, and even a little cocky. Sound like someone we know? It sounds like you guys. All right. Kings Point was one of 3 training facilities for federal officer candidates. The other 2 were in San Mateo, California, and Pass Christian, Mississippi. Their priorities were teaching engineering, seamanship, and navigation. But in August 1942, naval science was added to the curriculum, and officially all federal cadets were designated midshipmen in the United States Naval Reserve. In December 1942, the urgent need for ship's officers compressed the course of study into its final version. The 4th class year of basic instruction lasted 12 weeks. That was followed by a minimum of 6 months at sea on merchant vessels in the war zone as 3rd-classmen. After that, they returned to Kings Point for 36 weeks, which was their 2nd and 1st class courses of instruction. Altogether, that was a process of 18 months. San Mateo and Pass Christian only taught the first 12 weeks, 4th class year. They were considered basic schools. After their time at sea, all midshipmen would come to Kings Point to finish their advanced training before they returned to sea. Remember that hundreds of midshipmen returning to Kings Point had survived torpedo attacks and their ships sinking, which had made it hard for them to finish their sea year projects. They were called sea projects then, dating back to 1942 policy, and they even go further back than that. In the 1930s, when the authorities were considering creating maritime academies, whether state or federal, one of the ideas tossed around was correspondence schools. Students would be sent to sea with a giant packet of materials they had to study in their off-duty hours. An apprenticeship at sea, coupled with self-directed academic course of study, has always been the most effective brand of training possible. In 1942, our founders knew that this would set the Merchant Marine Academy apart from Annapolis and any other school in the business. The policy was, if your ship was torpedoed and your sea project went to the bottom of the ocean, you were assigned a new ship and you started your sea project all over. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The tales of combat or sudden attacks must have been terrifying to the midshipmen who had yet to go to sea, as well as those who would be going back. Still, they bravely carried on, willing to play the odds and take every precaution. 142 of those 3rd class midshipmen never returned. 68 more who had finished their entire 18-month program and went back out never came home. The last 3rd class midshipman to die was killed in the final stage of the war by a kamikaze attack off Okinawa as American forces pressed in against the Japanese home islands. In the late 1930s and through the war, the founders of Kings Point clung to a vision of this campus as a 4-year college that could confer degrees and stand on the equal footing with the other federal academies. With the war ending, a new mission statement on upholding the traditions of the Merchant Marine was established. One of the first ways Kings Point asserted its identity as a college was through athletics, which is why that football game against Rensselaer was so important, coming not long after the Japanese surrender. The wrestling team, based on their wartime training, murdered people, going undefeated in their first season. We had baseball, tennis, and basketball. Basketball went undefeated, and we fielded teams in cross country, swimming, sailing, and boxing. A new curriculum was developed, yet outsiders and experts were doubtful. You're going to compress 4 years of academics into 3 and send these kids to sea for a year, they asked. Are you sure? The administration was sure. Ever since those first cadets landed in the foot of Steamboat Road, Kings Pointers had been compressing a great deal of excellence into a limited amount of time. The truth is, Kings Point, you have always been awesome. This is what I have meant when I say that on these stones, this grass, stands one of the pillars of American greatness. The United States Merchant Marine Academy has never stood down from its World War II battle rhythm. As mariners, every one of our graduates is more qualified and experienced than anyone from the United States Naval and Coast Guard Academies or any other school in the nation. On our 80th birthday, we can see that some of our stones here and there need attention, yet our foundation is as stable as it was on the day it was laid. As we begin our next 80 years, God steer thee well, Kings Point.